Hello and welcome to the MB Om podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Today I've got a really special episode for you with an amazing yoga teacher that I know from my time living in Canmore, Alberta. Her name is Lydia Zamorano, and she has been all over the place. She began yoga in Golden, owned a studio in Squamish, BC, and is now located just outside of Canmore, Alberta, teaching at the Yoga Lounge owned by Jeff Ma, who has been in one of the other episodes on the MBO podcast. She has also traveled around the world with her husband, Sunny Trotter, who's a professional climber, and together they've had a lot of really incredible experiences, and she's been able to teach all over the world, which is pretty amazing. So one of the reasons that I wanted to have Lydia on the podcast was to talk about her transition as a yoga teacher into a yoga studio owner, and then from being a yoga studio owner, going back and simply being a yoga teacher, and then having a child and what that transition was like, and then developing a teacher training with Jeff Ma and Bree Johnson. So lots of really cool life experiences, and I think that she has a lot of lessons that new yoga teachers can learn from. So Lydia and I really just jumped into the interview, so without further ado, here it is. So I wanted to start the podcast as a way to talk to people who have been teaching for various amounts of time, who have done like all different things with their training, so that people who are new can see all the different options.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
And I think too, there's like so many realities that people don't understand. Like I think there's a big like, yeah, I'm going to open a studio. Okay, well, do you understand that like running a studio is running a business? Yeah. And that sort of thing. Yeah. So yeah, that's sort of what that's about.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I actually just got together with someone who's in my 300-hour training and went over a whole bunch of options on kind of like how to take your training and kind of alchemize it into teaching. Like, how do you do that? How do you make the transition?
Yeah.
So I had a bunch of tips that I could share with you that I thought were good ideas and kind of what I did when I started teaching.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Okay, amazing.
Awesome.
Well, one of the things that I did when I first got my first 200-hour is, one thing I would say is just practice as much as you can and as much as you have the time for to be able to embody what you're going to teach. Because that's really, if you don't practice what you're teaching, it'll be too heady. And the embodying process allows you to be more comfortable with bringing that information forwards a little bit more clearly.
Do you think that it's better to be practicing, or maybe not better, but what would you recommend in terms of like a self-practice versus a practice under somebody else, or like finding a balance between the two?
That's a really good question. I think it depends on your constitution a little bit. I mean, practicing under the guidance of somebody in the beginning, I think that's a really great idea, especially if you have like a master teacher who has practiced on their own quite a bit. But I would say, I mean, everyone has a different constitution, but I think that your own self-motivated practice will give you more tools and more authenticity at a certain point in your evolution than always working under the guidance of somebody else. Because there's so many levels of truth, and then for you to find your own truth, that'll come in the silence and the space and the inner guidance that you get on your own. But in the beginning, to be able to really get the groundwork and the framework for developing those tools, I think working under someone who has had that experience themselves is a really good idea.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, but I do feel like if you can have the motivation for a self-led practice, whether it's repeating a series that you have memorized and already know, or creating your own, which also, those are like different levels of truth. So in the beginning, sometimes it's easier to follow a series and just learn what you learn from your own inner guidance within that framework because you don't have to think so much. Mm-hmm. But then after a certain amount of time, you can make up your own intelligent sequencing. But it does help if you can have, I always tell people to memorize an intelligent sequence because then they know like counterposes, basic counterposes. I mean, they should be learning that in their teacher training anyways, but, you know, basic beginning exercises that warm up the body and tether the mind to the practice and clear. And then, like, there's this life to a good practice that sort of starts slow, peaks, and then closes. And if you follow an intelligent sequence, you can see how kind of the basic building blocks of the practice, and then you can take that and you can fly with it and play with it and embellish and add on and stuff like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, I think definitely moving towards your own self-motivated practice. I mean, for me, I never had problems doing that. I was always self-motivated, and I also started out of necessity with a self-practice because I was living in Lake Louise I was living in Golden when I started practicing, and then I moved to Lake Louise. So there was like quite a few years there where I was really motivated to practice on the daily, but I had like the Light on Yoga by Iyengar. I had David Swenson's Ashtanga Manual. Mm-hmm. And I just learned by myself, which I think was a really great way to start my practice because I had learned right from the beginning, as we're talking about kind of being immersed in something right from the beginning that might be a really great tool for the rest of his life. That's what I had when I started practicing. I was already immersed in motivating my self-practice.
So you didn't start going to classes?
No, I didn't.
That's so cool.
I didn't start by going to classes. And then going to classes was a total novelty to me. And it was simply an add-on to my self-practice.
Wow, that's incredible that you taught yourself to do that.
Yeah, the books were what really motivated me.
And so they just I started
practicing. Yeah, exactly. And you know what? I started practicing when yoga studios were just popping up in North America, in smaller towns. Like they were already in bigger cities, but I was mountain living, and I was self-practicing before the yoga lounge came to be. And then it was a novelty for me to go to the yoga lounge and practice I remember when it was being renovated.
That's so interesting.
And so there were no studios.
How did you discover yoga then? Like, what intrigued you to get these books?
The first thing, there was this East Indian medical doctor in Golden when I was living there and working at the ski hill, and he was doing like traditional, I think it was almost like Shivananda sequencing in the basement of the library.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just like because he wanted to teach yoga. He was a doctor, so he definitely didn't need to teach, but it was obviously a passion of his. And I remember everyone used to go like after. We were total diehard snow people. Like we'd be riding and skiing all day, and then we'd go on our long johns and woolies and like do this practice that was very not vinyasa. It was like dual posture and then lion shavasana, dual posture and then lion shavasana.
Sounds kind of
like very Sivananda style. And I randomly went to one of these classes with some of my friends. They were actually quite busy because that's the yoga studios back then were like, this is like 15 years ago.
Okay.
So those, the classes back then were just people who had the interest in teaching and were renting space because really like small communities couldn't support yoga studios because not enough people did it at the time.
Okay.
anyways, when I was in that class, that's when I really fell in love with, it was more like the Shavasana part for me. I was like, oh, this is like so relaxing. But actually, even I always was attracted to lead relaxation, because I remember when I was in grade 7, clearly my physical education teacher led us through like a yoga nidra practice.
Oh, cool.
And I was like so affected by that. I was so profoundly relaxed and able to drop in that was the first time I had actually really connected to the teachings of yoga. And then, I mean, more than that also was just my connection to being in nature, which also gave me that same feeling.
Yeah.
But as for like the practice itself as it is, like the asana and pranayama and meditation, that's when I started, and then with that doctor. And then I went to his classes quite a bit, but then I moved from Golden, and there was no yoga in Lake Louise. And I lived there for 2.5 years, I think. And then I self-led my practice the entire time I was there.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so that's definitely, I would encourage new teachers to get motivated to get onto their mat, self-motivated. And also just to be really wary of regurgitating information. So even though it's easier to do that in the beginning because that's what you're learning, just to like sit in the big picture of that's maybe somebody else's truth. And then like to really ask the question of what is my truth with this information that's been given to me? And what do I really connect with within that? And that's what makes a really good teacher.
Yeah. So having that self-practice where you can feel the pulse in your body and then teach from that place as opposed to hearing what somebody else says about it.
Yeah, exactly. And just kind of taking that somebody else's opinion and taking that on as your opinion, which is generally easier for the mind to do. But then dissolving that also gives you the big picture realization that there's more than one opinion on any given subject, which is kind of profound, just that.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's never a right. There's hardly a wrong. You know what I mean? So it's like, what's your thoughts on that? And critical thinking and kind of standing in your own truth, which is definitely, it doesn't come right away. So there's different, like I was saying, there's different levels of truth to teaching, and sometimes just taking a good sequence for what it is and sharing it with people, especially if it works for you, is the first level. And then doing that until you start to feel there's something more, and then going into that.
Cool. That's amazing.
Yeah. And then so for simply starting to teach, one thing that I tell people is that yoga classes are, yoga teachers can have a lot of experience these days, but yoga classes, like a drop-in yoga classes, is fairly expensive, drop-in, if you don't have a membership, right? So one thing that I do tell people is, when they're first starting teaching, is maybe rent a space or get in contact with your local yoga studio and ask if you can do a karma class, like a donation class, just to get the mileage, where maybe you can choose to donate that money to a really good cause, and then run something where you know you're going to get people, because say you run it cheaper than a drop-in class, run it at a good time where you can get the 9-to-5 workers and people who just want to be led. And then you get a lot of mileage that way to run a karma program for a short amount of time. And then through that mileage and through learning how you want to present yourself and the whole public speaking aspect and the whole just getting a little less nervy about teaching and learning what you're going to present. And then you can, if you wanted to approach a yoga studio to be on the sub list, like that would be the next phase, then you would be able to tell them that you had a certain amount of hours teaching.
Yeah,
which
awesome.
Yoga studio owners are always looking for. They want people with experience.
Yeah, especially too, like if you're in a community like Cam or Bev, where there's a lot of really experienced yoga practitioners and teachers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also the motivation that you're able to not rely on somebody to get your own experience.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point, that you're like willing to go out there and get it.
Yeah. So definitely something, I've been a yoga studio owner as well, but definitely something that yoga studios look for in teachers is mileage, comfort level with people, and comfort level with the information you're putting forward. Mm-hmm. And self-motivation is like the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Because if someone has that, they're going to move forwards on their own volition. So that's like probably the biggest thing that as a yoga studio I looked for in my teachers, and that really paid off, because then I wasn't left hanging by somebody who was kind of half motivated. I needed somebody who I knew that passion was burning in them, and and their motivation was they were going to show up, And since it's such a transient profession, and, you can be a yoga teacher on the side just as a passion, because it doesn't actually pay that much just to do drop-in classes.
Yeah.
But if you actually want to take it into a career, it's kind of easy right away to see that motivation burning in people. And I would say that if that's like really something that you want, is to take it into a career, then really sharing your passion and motivation with people that you're working with.
Yeah. So as somebody who's owned a studio in the past, would you say that if somebody, I feel like there's kind of this hard place between like teaching a couple classes a week and really wanting to dive into full time, but maybe not having like the financial bubble to be like quite there, but maybe talking to that studio owner and like, sharing your passion with them and sharing your excitement about that sort of thing, so that they know.
For sure. And then sharing that you will take it on to do your own advertising. So, self-marketing is a huge part of it. Mm-hmm. Being able to do that, not being too shy to self-market yourself. And also, if I was beginning, I would really I would research how to do, so this is something that you should learn in a teacher training as well, but how to do a progressive course, mm-hmm. and then offer it up that you would be willing to do that, and rent the space out and advertise on your own to do a progressive course, and get a group of people that you can work with that will potentially be students of yours for a while.
Yeah.
So you could run a 4 or 6 week progressive, which is a really great idea. And then maybe just make it like, if you're a beginning teacher, just make it a little bit more affordable to start. Make sure you get it out to a wide variety of people. And so that's a really nice way. And then once you've done a couple of progressives, then the next thing I would think about doing is just learning how to structure your own workshop.
Okay.
But of course, so progressives and workshops would come after you've taught for a certain amount of time, that you feel like you have a body of work that you could put forward intelligently.
Do you feel like there's a certain number of hours or a certain amount of time people should have taught for, or is it kind of, people having that sort of self-led, okay, I feel like I'm ready now?
Yeah, I think it's a really slippery slope, because I feel like I've known a lot of people over the years that have been practicing for 15, 20 years, but they only do it part-time. Mm-hmm. And maybe they're not diving into something super deep and giving it, or maybe they're not able to give it that much time. It's through no fault of their own, but, it's prioritizing someone who maybe has only practiced and taught for 3 years, but they've had a 6-day-a-week practice where they've been really self-motivated. That person's going to have a lot more to share. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, definitely I would say it's actual present practice time.
Yeah.
Practice time when you're on the mat and you're really present. And those hours, 10,000 hours to mastery or something.
Yeah.
those are the hours. Some people can get a lot of hours in 365 days because they're so motivated. And so a year might be a completely different level of truth to someone who is a super motivated, introspective, present practitioner than somebody who is just going to classes and not even memorizing a sequence and just going through the motions and then not even really having that contemplative time with it.
Yeah, I gotcha. That makes sense. It's interesting too with the 10,000 hours because I read that in one of Malcolm Gladwell's books years ago. And it's really easy to think with things, at least for me, it's like, you know, with writing or yoga, it's like, I do this all the time, like, but I feel like I'm not getting that much better. But then if I actually sit down and write out, you know, how often I do it, I'm like, okay, well, you know, I'm only X amount of hours into it. Like I've got so much further to go, and so much growth to do. I
also think it's, sorry, you keep going.
I was going to say, I just feel like it's an interesting perspective to take.
Yeah, it is an interesting perspective to take. And I think also part of that is what I was saying about really present time. So maybe, you know, you could waste 5 hours of doing something, but not being fully there.
Yeah.
Not being in the reality of it, not being like completely curious and wonder and in wonderment about the subject. You could be like half-assed in it, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
And then that literally wouldn't count for 10,000 hours. I think there's a yoga sutra that talks about like sustained practice starts to work only if it's done over a really long period of time without interruption. And I think that part of like without interruption means that there's not that much distraction in that time.
Yeah.
That time is dedicated to that thing. Because I know I've had practices before when I'm like thinking about other stuff and I don't even really feel like I've really dropped in.
Yeah, and it's interesting in today's society where we're so like go, 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 cell phones are constantly around. Like it's really hard to separate yourself from all the things that are going on.
It is. Yeah, it takes dedication. It takes motivation. It takes all those things that, you know, will make somebody a good teacher.
Yeah, definitely.
And have something really important to share, especially in this time when we have like really technology-induced distracted mind.
Oh, for sure. I read a stat that was like, if a web page doesn't load in 3 seconds, we start to feel that initial like irritation with our internet.
Yeah, for sure. Like what's going on with my computer?
Yeah. And it's funny because when I catch myself doing it, because I really try to practice patience in my life and I find it happening to me and I'm like, this is hilarious. It's been like 3 seconds. Like it's a fraction of time. It's so insignificant.
Yeah. I mean, it's also really interesting, like, just on that, like, I don't know what your thoughts are on a lot of the marketing around yoga right now is, I mean, Matthew Rensky does a lot of interesting work on this, but just, like, very physical and there's, like, an interesting curve in, like, instant gratification yoga marketing right now. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do think there is.
Like something like I love seeing people move in a really intelligent, complex way.
Yeah.
But there is something there that I think is interesting for new teachers coming into yoga now. It's so different than it was coming into yoga 15 years ago. The marketing wasn't like it is now at all. So there has been a massive shift.
Yeah, like yoga is such a buzzword now. Like it's,
and it's also like
yoga is sort of like a thing that people want to say they do.
Yeah, and what about like yoga girl? What about that? You know?
Yeah, like
what does that imply? What do you think about when someone says that? Does it have a sexual charge to it? You know?
Like when somebody says her name or with like being on Instagram.
Yeah. I think like, and actually I don't really have aversion to any of it. I think it's all part of the whole thing. But I do feel like, so when I started practicing and teaching, like nobody's names were on the schedules.
Okay.
And there wasn't as much of a drive to self-market as there is now.
So less of sort of like a dog-eat-dog competitive sort of world.
Yeah, I think so. There's definitely been a shift that I think a lot of people would agree with. But I think that's a tricky thing with teachers that are coming out of teacher trainings right now. Like, what do they think they need to do to have a following, you know?
Yeah, definitely. That's a really interesting point, because social media is this thing that you're kind of like told that you should be a part of if you want to be successful in business.
Yeah. But I do think it's a beautiful thing too. Like, I think it's amazing to be able to see what people are up to and witness witness people's practices. Like, I think it's beautiful, and I think there's so many good things to it. But I do think critical thinking for people who are coming out on how they want to market themselves and what they really think is involved in sharing what is authentic to them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and kind of figuring out, you know, what sort of things that you want to do to market yourself and what sort of things you're interested in.
And how you really want to be seen and witnessed.
Yeah, definitely. Because people...
And what is your strength, you know?
Yeah. People make judgments, assumptions. They make, they get a first impression from you. So if their first impression's on your Instagram account, you know, what are you putting out there? And, you know, are you happy with that?
Yeah, I think that's just a really good question for people who are starting to think about what it would take to have students, you know? And also, I mean, I think one of my friends recently, we were having this conversation about, well, if you have a large Instagram following or a large social media following, does that really mean that you're going to have more people coming to your workshops and classes? Or is there actually a direct correlation, you know? And for some, yes. But if you're in a small town and word of mouth is really a powerful tool for you having a student body and then just your presence in the community, I think there's that too, you know, where are you going to put your efforts?
Yeah, that's a good point for sure, is kind of figuring out, you know, what your like area, your city, you know, your town, the place that you... And
how can you be an active member of the community? Sorry to interrupt you, but...
No, that's fine. Yeah, no, I think that's a great point.
Yeah, instead of just being on the technology all the time, you know?
Yeah, and it's kind of, do you want to be this like sort of international yoga teacher, or do you want to be this teacher that's just like really great and really well known where you live?
And maybe involved in... I mean, Gary Snyder says it really well. There's this quote by him, I'm probably going to botch it, but it's something about like, pick a piece of land and like dig your roots in there. And community, even though Sunny and I are such gypsies and we travel a lot, but I've always like really been able to dig into a community. And I think that's, part of my challenge about our gypsy lifestyles because of Sunny's work has been not really being able to be in one place for a really long time or, you know, having to travel away. But I really feel a lot of benefit to being an active part of a community. And even in a city, if you're in a city, like usually cities have their little sectors and you can really like be active and with people's lives.
Yeah.
In a small sector, you know? Yeah,
it's kind of a cool thing that I've seen. Like, I was really nervous to come, like, try to practice yoga in a city of 6.3 million when I was in a town of, like, 15,000, where everyone kind of knows everyone, and there's this really tight-knit, amazing yoga community. And I kind of found that there's sort of, like, these little pockets of community. So it's just different.
Yeah, it's just different, yeah.
So
anyways, hope I'm not going on too much of a tangent here.
No, that's great. I think that's all really valuable stuff for people who are fresh out of teacher training. In terms of owning a yoga studio, owned a studio in Squamish?
I did. I co-owned a studio space. So there was myself and another woman who owned it together and really started at grassroots.
Cool. What was that experience like?
It was really neat. I mean, small town yoga studio is definitely challenging. Well, it was challenging for us because there were 2 studios in a town of like 17,000.
Okay.
And then 2 more other studios opened up. So there were 4 studios in that small of a space, that small of a demographic. So it was a bit more challenging, but we were really creative with the way that we made it work. It definitely wasn't for me. So I was really glad that I dove into it, and I learned so much about business, diving into that. But because really the reason why I couldn't stay with it was because Sonny travels so much for work and he really wanted me to be able to travel with him. And plus we both work for Patagonia. So I often get opportunities to be able to travel with him fully paid for working for Patagonia. So it didn't really work that I was always tied to staying and he was traveling all the time because he really wanted us to share that together. And that was just part of our life at the time. So I know that you could have a studio and really get other people to run it, but the way that we organized our studio was that my partner and I did pretty much all of the classes. And so people really wanted to see us when we were teaching. So when we got subs in the beginning, because we started it so grassroots that we really didn't have that many teachers. And then when we got subs, the attendance would go way down. So
like people were really
we found it really hard to leave. Yeah, we found it really hard to leave. So then what we ended up, but it was fine. Like it was beautiful. We had such a great space and we ran so many neat community events out of that space. It really ended up being like a community learning space because we had Qigong, we had dance, we had mom and baby stuff. We had this amazing, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. There's just a beep. We had this amazing karma program that myself and this other woman set up where women could come for donation yoga and then they could, we had childcare arranged for them. And that program was like 25 to 30 people, which maxed out our space like every week for years. It's still running right now. And it's a very successful program. So we did so many cool things out of that space. But I loved it. It just didn't work for my partnership and my marriage to have a studio space. And we're much happier in our family with me not having that responsibility.
Yeah, definitely.
Because it allows us to be a lot more free as a family unit, which is essentially my main not worry, but my main focus.
Yeah, and I think it's cool for people to hear about that because I think that, I feel like there's this massive shift with like feminism and equal opportunities for women and like, be a strong woman. And I think that there's still this idea that it's really okay to want to put your family as a priority and want to be a mom and want to be there like, with your partner. I think that that's important too.
Well, my partner, Sonny, and I, we've always been each other's biggest cheerleader and supporter. And we inspire each other a lot. So, and I'm like, I can say with no hesitation that we are an amazing couple. We work really well together. And that's always been my first focus. And now that we have a small family unit, and we're probably going to expand that next year, that's really my main focus. So I have to cater my job to my main focus, which really is that. Which really is having like a thriving family unit. So it just didn't really work for me to have a studio, but I learned so much through it. And
what are a few of the main things that you learned from owning a studio? Well,
I learned that my passion was teaching. that was probably the biggest thing that I learned. So in order to run a studio, I think someone has to have the want to be a manager of the studio. So that takes all of the business. You know, of course you can outsource a lot of stuff like accounting, but I ended up doing, because it was such a small scale business, that we ended up doing everything. And we also wanted to know everything intimately, so we were in control of everything at the start. And so we really started at grassroots doing everything. We taught all the classes, we did all the accounting, we did all the marketing, we did all of our own web design, we did absolutely everything.
Wow.
So that's that's essentially what I learned. But then I did learn that it took, and then because I taught so much during that time, all in all, it was more than full-time work. I just realized it wasn't sustainable for me. Mm-hmm. And in order to make it work in a town with 4 studios, we really sort of had to do everything. So, but I realized that really for me, instead of running the day-to-day classes and running a studio, what I really wanted to do was teach trainings and teach teachers, and which I could have done out of that space had I had outsourced a lot of the stuff that I was doing. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really I'm not a very good micromanager of a lot of other people.
Yeah.
And fair. Because that takes away, like I manage my family. And at this point, I think, you just have to be somebody with that kind of constitution to really want to do all that business stuff at first, or else be able to really intelligently outsource it and still feel like you have a handle on all of it. So for me, I realized that I really wanted to go into workshops and trainings. And I have so many cool projects now that I would have never been able to have had I had that studio. And I'm sure someone could juggle it all, but being a mom, I knew I wanted to be a mom, and I knew I needed to make space for that. Yeah. So being a mom, owning a studio, even co-owning, which is still quite a lot of work because you're also constantly having to bounce ideas back and forth with somebody because you're only like 50% in control. So that's also takes a lot of negotiating, but having to make space in my life. And now I have all these amazing projects. Like I'm an ambassador for a women's active line, and for Patagonia, I teach online classes in the States for this amazing company called Yoga Anytime. And I'm just so grateful for those opportunities that I probably would have never made space for. And then also I'm able to be, my child isn't in full-time daycare, so I'm also able to be with my child and then keep all those really fantastic projects going. So that's what I really learned, is that I needed to make space for, I think, things that I'm just naturally more adept.
Yeah, I think it's cool too when you can have this experience and kind of tune into like, okay, this is like a cool thing, but it's not necessarily where I want to be going or what I want to do forever. Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that's pretty amazing that you were able to do that and kind of like figure out what it was that you wanted to do.
Yeah, and for somebody who's really wants to snuggle into a place and it works on the daily for them to be a yoga studio owner. Mm-hmm. And run all the day-to-day things and really be present there, because I think that's really supportive, is to be present in the community. Because of our lifestyle, which is quite alternative to travel a lot, it didn't work for us. But I think that's something for a yoga studio owner, I would say, that's something that you'd want to be ready to do, is really be in the community, be present, be able to deal with things daily. And of course, like, you want to make space to be able to get away. But I did feel like in a small community, it was better if I was there all the time, and I wasn't really able to fulfill that. So yeah, that would be a hot tip.
Yeah, no, that's great. I feel like that's definitely like a good life learning that you had there.
Yeah.
So you and Jeff and Bree are kind of like, I guess, co-coordinating the advanced teacher training at the Yoga Lounge right now. Is this your first teacher training that you've done?
It is my first training. I've done not Yoga Alliance certified trainings. I've done a lot of practitioner development courses and retreats and workshops. But this is, the first actual really big program that I've done. It's a year and a bit program. It's a year and a couple months. So it is the longest program for sure.
That's quite a long program. Is that pretty standard for like a 300 level that's kind of like broken apart, or would normally they be more intense?
There's a lot of different ways that you could structure it. A lot of people would choose to do it in a shorter amount of time and have bigger teaching blocks, but for us, it made sense that we ran it over that longer period of time for people to really integrate the information. And I sincerely think that it's better for the student. I mean, it's actually not totally better for the teachers to have it over such a long period of time, especially we're all parents.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of commitment, and there's a lot of unknown in a year and a half period.
Oh,
but
yeah,
I think for the student, for them to be able to really dive into that group of people and get really close to the group that they're working with, which is a really incredible part of teacher training, the bonding that happens between people, and then also to really integrate the information with time. I think it's better to have a longer program.
Yeah, I think that I know when I did my 200 level, I really debated between doing a program that was at home that was going to be longer or going away. And my love for travel took me away, and I'm completely fine with that decision. But having done a teacher training that was so compact and so fast, I've thought about, what the difference in my level as a teacher would have been coming out had it been over like 6 or 9 months, because it is a lot of information to kind of digest very quickly.
I think so. And you know what, just to say though, I have taken a 200 hour in a month time that was an intensive.
Yeah.
That was fantastic, and I got a lot from it, from being in a period of kind of like, I think it was like 3.5 weeks, but I didn't work during that time because I traveled for it. So that was really hugely beneficial, to be in an intensive period of study without any other stuff.
Yeah, that's what I did. And I think there's pros and cons.
Yeah, I think there's pros to that.
I feel like I would get distracted from the yoga if I did it over, had I done a teacher training that was once a month over 9 months and I was still working full time. And I talked to lots of other people, who are like, I want to really get into the poses and have time to practice with the people that I'm doing my training with. And I can totally see that. But I think there is something about going there and having no distractions for 3.5 weeks and totally being immersed in nothing but yoga.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely amazing. And then I think if you have the motivation to keep it going, then that would be really beneficial. But I also feel like taking information and letting it simmer, especially if you are a home practitioner. So if you're doing a program over a long period of time and you take that information and you really work with a body of work for a month, and then you come back and learn a new thing and work with that for a month, I think there's just so much experience to be had in that. So after us just hashing that out, I think there's definitely pros and cons to both. And I think that Jeff and Bree and I will probably in the future run an intensive as well.
Yeah.
That's more condensed. But I think having both is really nice. But I do really feel like already we're only not even finished. There's 3 modules and we're just getting to the end of module 1. And people are just getting so much from integrating work over a longer period of time.
Oh yeah, for sure. I could definitely see that. And especially too with the 300 level, you're getting even deeper into everything and digging in a little bit more. There's a lot of subtle work and a lot of detail-oriented work, and then a lot of seeing the practice and having the tools and the intelligence to be able to translate it to a lot of different bodies, a lot of different types of people. So there's a lot of studying involved. Yeah, I could see that for sure. It seems like it's just that next level from 200 hour. And how has it been running the training? Has it been sort of everything you imagined? Has it been more challenging?
That's a good question. I definitely feel like when people first come together, there's just a lot more energy so the first weekend that we had together was just a lot of energy of newness and learning people and learning where the group is at and learning the group dynamic. And now that we've been together for, this will be our 4th weekend together, there's such a amazing comfort level, and we're all so close already that I can't imagine where that's going to take us over a year.
Yeah.
I feel so lucky. I also feel like our group is just fantastic. We just mesh really well as a group. And there's actually so many people who are very talented that I feel like the group isn't just learning from the 3 facilitators, the group is learning from each other. So there's many people with quite a vast anatomy background. There's a chiropractor, there's 2 chiropractors, and a massage therapist, and someone who's done dance for a really long time and taught dance. And there's just a lot of intelligence in the group.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I feel like there's this beautiful thing where we're learning as a group organism instead of, the teacher-student relationship is more complex. So yeah, it's really beautiful. I'm enjoying it. I didn't really have too many expectations, but I'm really enjoying it.
That's awesome. That's cool.
And it's definitely, I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just feel like I feel like after this first month, I'm like, wow, I would consider myself so fortunate to be able to run programs like this until I'm in my 70s.
Wow, that's amazing.
So that was really a beautiful realization.
Yeah, that's super cool. I feel like it's very rare that people have these moments where they're like, I want to do this until I'm long past retirement. So
mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't imagine doing anything that I would like more. Yeah.
Do you feel like you've kind of found your sort of your niche within being a yoga teacher then? Is it sort of the teacher trainings?
I think so. I'm enjoying that more than anything, definitely more than workshops and travel teaching and retreats. I think I really enjoy working with people over a period of time and getting to know people. And then I feel like so much of yoga is the art of relationship too. So instead of a one-off where I travel somewhere and do a workshop and I never really see the people again,
Yeah.
Or maybe I do have contact with them, but it's not the same as the nuggets of insight and joy I get from really being in relationship with people with this practice, it can be so transformative and deep and connecting.
That's awesome.
So that's where I love to be, is in the relationship part.
Yeah. Cool. I think that's actually so spectacular. When you said that, I just had the biggest smile on my face. I know you can't see.
Oh, yeah. Me too.
I feel like it's kind of what, I've thought so much about what is our purpose here? What are we doing? We're just these crazy creatures that are thinking and feeling and doing stuff. And it's why are we here? And I think that it's really about finding something that makes us happy. So
yeah, definitely the trainings make me really happy. And I'm also just so grateful to all the teachers that I've had that have been such incredible teachers. And I have to say, I'm doing the whole philosophy section on this training, and that's been completely enhancing my life, even though it's a lot of work. And I find myself up after midnight many, many nights with 3 different references in front of me. But I'm just really loving diving into the ancient tradition that's still alive now and still so relevant. And that's such a huge part of the yoga practice for me. So that's been something that I'm so excited to study over a lifetime.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I feel too, it must be such a good way to learn. I know for me, I really learn through teaching things. Like I was a marketing teaching assistant in university, and I learned so much more about marketing through being a teaching assistant than I ever did when I took that class.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I feel like going through yoga philosophy and developing like your own sort of take on the content would be this really great way to kind of take it all in and learn about it, even though, you know, you've probably read about it so many times in the past.
I have, but it's not sinking in the way that it is now. It's just, and I've had the opportunity also to have really incredible philosophy teachers like Ravi Ravindra, and Richard Freeman, and Oritz and Gupta. All three of those people are just so amazing and have taken so much. So what I've learned from them, which is making my life sleepless, taking many different resources and kind of cross-referencing them and finding the many different layers of truth that come from not only one source, but a variety of sources, and then kind of putting them together to offer people different points of view so that they can kind of find their own truth within that, but no dogma. So I've been really enjoying that process. Amazing.
And then something else that I wanted to just talk about quickly is transitioning from just being like but from being, you know, a yoga studio owner to a yoga teacher, and then having a child and becoming a mom and a yoga teacher.
Yeah.
Like I talked to Aaron a little bit about it, and I mean, I'm pretty close with Jeff, and I hear the constant stuff that is his family life, and it seems like parenthood is so full on. And I'm just wondering how your being a yoga teacher has sort of changed with having a child.
Well, you know what's interesting that I've looked back on is I've made the biggest leaps in my career with being a mother as a yoga teacher. So I've had the motivation, the extra motivation, and I don't know what I would call it, but I've just put things that I really wanted, and I've just acted on them because I really don't have time to think about it too much. And so if I want to get something done, I simply have to get it done. You know what I mean? Because I just don't have time to ruminate and to doubt. And I like, if it's there for me and I actually want to go for it, I feel like that's been a gift, a huge gift, with having Tate. But also I've never been as busy. I've never been as like pushed to my edge.
Yeah.
And kind of like, I've never needed meditation so much because I'm just my mind is quite busy all the time with multitasking.
Yeah.
I've never lost my keys so many times as I have in the last 2 years. You know what I mean? Like misplaced things. And then Sunny's like, why aren't you present? And it's funny because I think like as a mom, I don't know, in my household anyways, I'm multitasking, and women are way better at multitasking than men. But I do feel like there are moments of like where I need the yoga the most to center because I'm always doing a few things at once.
Yeah,
but I'm also,
definitely.
I'm super, like, now that we're thinking about having another child, I'm like, how am I going to possibly juggle all of this? Like, it seems impossible and such a huge project. But I also have this faith that the confidence and the motivation that Tate has given me, I feel like another child will just, for one, increase my capacity to love, increase my capacity to take on more. And I really want that. Like both Sunny and I really want to have 2 children, and that's it. But like, I'm so super scared because also I've worked so hard in the last couple of years to develop a lot of things and to get these projects that I've always really wanted to do up and running. And I'm scared of taking this break off, but then I also know how temporary it is and how potentially I could be, you know, better at all of it when I come back, and also have this thing that I've always wanted, which has been like a family unit with And I have 4 siblings that I'm super close to, so
Okay.
I would just love Tate to have a sibling, and Sunny's always visualized that.
Yeah.
But then we definitely want to keep traveling, you know, keep our really dynamic lifestyle, and I want to keep doing teacher trainings and all of that. But yeah, I mean, there's total craziness and there's total moments of enlightenment within it all. But, I mean, I think it's not for everyone, and I feel like we're lucky to have one, a pretty mellow child who's an incredible traveler, and then 2, a very high level of personal motivation, both of us as parents. But yeah, it's totally scary and then totally beautiful.
Yeah. I saw that video you posted the other day. He's just like playing quietly. And then he's like, Mom, I need attention.
Oh yeah. And it's constantly like that. Like I can maybe get a few seconds in, like that would be all I would get in. But I don't really practice. So he just got up from his nap there. So if I'm finishing my practice, I'll do like a few more minutes and then he needs me right away. So, but I usually practice when he's sleeping.
Yeah. That was pretty cute though. It's just like,
oh my God, he I don't know if you saw, but he had this little ambulance and he put it right under my nose.
Yeah, I saw that. I was thinking about what a funny like childhood it would be. Cause like, it'll be so normal for him when he's like, you know, starting to make memories and stuff to just like have a mom who's like upside down half the time.
All the time. Yeah.
Like he's going to go to school and be like, what? Your mom's not like upside down constantly?
I know. But I think it's kind of cool, like that he can see, you know, I think like the other thing about, for me, for traveling so much with him, I mean, he's been more places than most people have been by the time they're in their 30s.
Oh, yeah.
So I think like him seeing the world as, it just makes it like more possible to do things. And then I also think him watching Sunny climbing at such a high level and him watching me always invert, it's like, oh, these things are super possible and normal. And so it makes a new normal that I'm excited to share with a little being.
Yeah, I think that that's really incredible because it's, you know, so many people have these fears, especially around things like climbing or going upside down in yoga. And if you're just like brought up in this and traveling as well and seeing other cultures.
And traveling as well.
Yeah, if you're just
definitely a lot of people, it's a huge deal to go somewhere, you know, to pack their bags and go somewhere, whereas there's hardly 2 months that we're not doing that. So he's just so used to it by now that actually he's been born into it. So I'm excited to see like how does he turn out? You know, is he like, does he have traveling fever all the time, or does he actually want to go the opposite way and just like hunker down? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I definitely think he'll have a few less basic fears.
Yeah.
Which I'm excited about. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be super cool.
Yeah.
It's really cool because when I talked to Erin, she was talking about, you know, it's interesting to hear how you both have developed teacher trainings while having a really small child. And hearing this, like, I was so motivated. Like, she was like, every time Mika slept, I wrote content. And it sounds like you're kind of the same way. It's like, you know, he's in bed and I'm working on this. And I think it's really cool because, I mean, an idea that I've had in my head for a long time, and I think a lot of people have it, is like, you know, you decide to have a child and your life kind of stops. And that's something that I know is not a truth, as I've like seen more people in my life have children. But it's this idea that it's like, you know, you're a parent and that's what you do. And I think it's so cool to hear like really successful, amazing yoga teachers being great parents and then also doing these things that are still following their dreams.
Yeah. And you know what, for me, when you're saying that, I think, well, because of that fear and that kind of cultural fear that a lot of people have, that's kind of propelled me into the opposite direction of like that fear actually being there hasn't been a bad thing for me, because it's been like, okay, this is here, this is a possibility, but what if I really counteract that, you know?
Yeah.
And then, also that, I don't know, I just feel like something happens when you have a child that if you're a self-motivated person, I mean, Sunny would attest to it completely, is that he climbed harder, the hardest he has in his life after Tay was born.
Interesting. That's really
yeah.
cool.
I mean, and that's just like a physical thing, but it's also like his passion and his life force is so intertwined in that. And his motivation has gone way up. And also like his capacity to juggle more has gone way up. So, I mean, not saying that'll happen to everyone, but I think if it's there for the taking, I think.
Yeah. No,
and
really
the
cool.
embodying and then also there's this amazing new being in your life that is also giving you so much love energy. Mm-hmm. So the energy of like love and the infinite energy is like pouring into you, which is amazing.
Yeah, like you're kind of your kid's whole world, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
I'm sure it's exhausting at times, but
it's so exhausting, dude. I can't tell you how much. Sometimes I'm like, how am I going to get through this? But then, yeah, the well is deep.
That's awesome. That's good to hear.
Well, I better get going because I really want to get on my mat.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for making the time for this. It's incredible.
Oh, I'm so grateful. I'm really glad we had this talk. It's also just amazing to talk about things, to be grateful about what you have and what you've learned. So thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you. You are so inspiring, which is why I reached out to you. Every time I watch your videos,
so much.
I'm like, I need to practice more.
Well, I would love to hear about your practice more.
Yeah, definitely. We will be in touch for sure.